So much of my own enjoyment of art not only comes from the finished object in purely an aesthetic or a conceptual or even emotional level, but for me a huge part of that enjoyment actually comes from an understanding of how something is made or how it's put together. But I guess understanding the story behind it or the craftsmanship involved gives me a better appreciation for the finished piece. It was a sort of byproduct or failing, if you like, of the digital technology that gave the initial inspiration to these droplet paintings. I was scrolling through my phone just looking at images in an area of low connectivity, so the images were failing to load properly. So what I was left with were these sort of soft palettes of fuzzy colour. Those images were actually more interesting to me than the original. At a later date, I looked further into visual glitches and began wondering how those abstracted images could be, I guess, manifested into real-world tangible objects in the studio with the machinery and technology that I have here every day. It was also during this time that I was travelling somewhere in a window seat, and I remember watching the droplets of condensation or raindrops run down the plexiglass pane window. And I remember observing how each one of those tiny droplets of water kind of acted as its own little prism and had its own unique colour. It began to remind me more and more of the work that I was doing in the studio and looking at these abstracted sort of visual glitches. All these little elements or grains of inspiration combined with studio practices already familiar to me and things that I was working on in the studio and previous works have resulted in the first droplet paintings in this series. So much of my work starts with what I think is a fairly simple idea or visualization that a year down the track you're still involved in the research and development stage, you're still working on that technical problem or this technical issue, one thing just follows another. So it's almost an exercise in constantly checking yourself against that original visualization to making sure you're staying true to that goal and you're not just settling for something else. The original glitched image is run through several different other computer programs. That computer program gives us the diameter and cut depth for each droplet. It also gives us a colour match to real-world paints based on the original digital image. Once all of that is done, that can then go off and we can have the finished artwork digitally printed onto a laminate, which is then rolled onto the 18mm plexiglass as a sort of paint by numbers and cut guide for the CNC machine. Each of the scallops is cut by a handmade unique tool. We've done all the research on the optimum cut speed to produce the best finish in that scallop before it's then sent away to be flame polished. All of that work has to be done before the final plexiglass panel, or canvas if you like, is sent back to us at the studio, and we can then begin filling each scallop with hand-tinted epoxy resin. The process of actually removing so much of the original material, in this case the plexiglass, in early trials was causing us huge problems. Ultimately, this led me onto another incredibly lengthy process of designing an aluminium framing system. These frames are now incredibly strong and lightweight. They have got room for the plexiglass inside to expand and contract. But crucially for me, I wanted something that would give me the freedom to alter the air gap between the front surface of the plexiglass, the painting essentially that you're looking at, and then the backboard. That air gap is crucial to the finished result because you get the shadow on the backboard, and therefore you get this sort of three-dimensional quality or sculptural quality that's essential for me. I try to plan and trial the execution of each work, so much so that when it comes to the final assembly of it, or the final painting of it if you like, there's very little that's left to chance. But of course, when you're working basically in reverse, which is what we're doing, there's always an element of chance. So there's always that heart in your mouth moment every time with all the works. When you turn them over for the first time and pull that protective plastic layer off, you get that sort of, is this work going to be okay moment. On first glance, the droplets could almost be viewed as one-dimensional objects, but the negative space between the artwork and the frame creates a shadow which kind of draws us closer, and it's on closer inspection that the work reveals its spherical qualities. You get this sort of interplay of light where light bounces off one coloured droplet and reflects and merges with the one next to it, creating its own unique colour combination. In that way, although I've titled the works droplet paintings, they could equally be viewed as sculptures.